Hello and welcome to all of you for this week's podcast on AI in the legal sector. My name's Simon Walker. I'm one of the founders at FSP and I head up the AI business unit. I'm here to talk to Alex Bazin today about the developments that are happening across the legal industry. So, welcome Alex. Before we start, it'd be great to hear you introduce yourself, what your role is, what your experience is and why you're interested in AI.
Yeah, sure. I'm Alex. I'm CTO and COO at Lewis Silkin. Lewis Silkin is a mid-sized UK law firm, the Lawyers Law Firm of the Year 2025. We talk about ideas, people and possibilities. So we're best known for our employment work on the people's side, but also immigration and reward. And then on the ideas side, the whole range of creative economy work, so very well known in the advertising sector, but also in science, media, technology as well. My background, I actually have a doctorate in machine learning a very long time ago, before transformers were even a thing. I would call that AI now, but back then it was very much machine learning. My career trajectory was in traditional big tech and system integration. And then I really wanted to move in-house and found myself at Lewis Silkin about 4 years ago. Lewis Silkin has the ambition to be a technology-enabled law firm. And so clearly that's much wider than AI, but AI has to be at the heart of any technology strategy these days. And so that's kind of where I've come back into AI, is thinking about how do we use technology and AI in particular to help deliver more for our clients, to deliver more for our colleagues, both in our legal teams and in our business teams.
Perfect, thank you. I love your introduction actually to Lewis Silkin and a bit about your goals and stuff, because again, I think as a values-led organisation, there's a lot of synergies between our organisations, which I think helps us to work pretty well together. And very pleased to have you here.
Thank you.
Should we start really big picture and talk about how you see AI influencing the legal sector? We'll come on to a bit more detail about Lewis Silkin itself, but your perspective on the broader sector and what impact you think that's having, what are the big things to think about?
Yeah, the legal sector is very, very broad. And so it's quite difficult to talk about the legal sector as a single entity. Probably when I talk today, I'm mostly talking about commercial legal work. We don't do criminal justice work. There's a whole nother podcast probably about that, but I'm not one to talk about it. But within the commercial sector, it is obviously the topic on everyone's lip. Every conference you go to in the legal sector, whether it's a legal technology conference or just a legal conference, is talking about AI, both in terms of how it's shaping some of the really interesting questions in law, how our clients are dealing with the commercial constructs of using AI in their works, but also in how will AI affect the delivery of legal services. And a lot of that has been focused on how does that make legal services more cost effective, more efficient, quicker. But I think it's also, it gives us an opportunity to do things quite radically differently. And so there are opportunities for us to rethink the way that a lot of people deliver legal services, probably serve a lot of unmet needs. And I think that will resonate through the industry over the coming years. I think there's an old Bill Gates quote that says you generally overestimate the short-term impact of technology and underestimate the long-term impact of technology. So while I'm very enthusiastic about AI and very optimistic about the effect it will have, I suspect we're in that kind of bedding in phase of everyone's rushed in, everyone wants to be talking about what they're doing, but it will take a while for those effects to really become clear.
How do you think the legal sector is doing compared to other sectors in terms of adoption of AI, usage of AI?
the evidence suggests that it's actually doing quite well, which is unusual because the legal industry has often been seen as a laggard in technology adoption. Yeah. But Thomson Reuters recently did a survey that says 28% of law firms have adopted AI in some sense, and that's ahead of the rest of the professional services. AI does lend itself quite nicely to the sort of work lawyers do and the sort of work we do in the business teams within legal industry as well. The work we do is very word heavy, word centric, and so there's a obvious lean towards large language models in terms of being able to do that. There is quite a lot of fairly routine structured work within the legal profession as well. And there's a lot of extracting information from documents, compiling information, bringing together information from various sources. And again, it's something that can actually be done quite reliably with large language models. And so it's maybe one of those first technologies that really lends itself to legal work beyond anything else, and then you can extend that to consulting and accountancy and the other professional services as well. I would have said.
But do you think because very early on in the sort of generative AI space and the LLM space, one of the early sort of bespoke language models was the likes of Harvey and Agora and that sort of stuff. They came out quite early. A lot of other sectors don't have those sorts of applications. Do you think that's had an impact to it? Is it the availability of something, or is it the inherent nature of the work that is done that means that it lends itself to LLMs, or a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not a cop-out answer. Yeah. I think that there is a lot that is just inherently good for large language models, and that doesn't mean it's good for all parts of the work that we do in law firms, but there are specific areas where you can get a lot of value very quickly. And even when the GPT-2 came out and GPT-3, there were a lot of law firms piling in very quickly to fine-tune their own models or build wrappers around the commercially available models. Yeah. Sort of just as the Harveys and the Lagoras and the co-counsels were starting to kick off. I do think that where that adoption has been helped by those commercial tools has been that they understand the lawyer's workflow and that they've built tools that the lawyers can grab hold of and use more intuitively. They don't need to be prompt engineers. They don't need to really think very hard about how they structure their tasks. There's some of that is built for them either by the tool, or it gives us in the technology side of the business the opportunity to tune that for the lawyers, so we can build workflows that our lawyers can then press a button, upload the right documents, the right context, search specific legal sources such as the government's legislation website or that sort of stuff. So it is a bit of both. What I found quite interesting when we were selecting to roll out Harvey firm-wide was we did look at a number of tools, and we ran standard tasks through each of them. So a chronology task from an employment case, or an extraction of information from a bundle of rights documents that we were helping transact for a client. And actually the output from each of the commercial tools was quite similar. But the experience for the lawyers was very different. Yeah. And so you had the same output from two different tools, and they both, to me at least, and actually to the lawyers, they said that they've both done a pretty good job. Yeah. But one of them, the lawyer was like, yeah, that was cool. And the other one was like, you'll be flying this out of my cold dead hands. Yeah. And I think a lot of that was about how do we interact with that technology, and particularly for non-technical users who have a job to do and aren't maybe as keen as you and I would be, and sort of really geeking out on the hows and the structures of this stuff. It's how do you get people who are often non-technical, who often have kind of deliberately avoided technology in some senses. They went into the law to be lawyers. They didn't go into the law to be technologists. How does that grab them? How does that set them in the context of their day-to-day working life? And how does that make life easier for them? And so that's been a lot of the shift from in-house to more productized solutions, I think, has been following that trend and helping the adoption curve. I would say
it's an interesting observation, actually, because I think what a lot of people are trying to do is train people in prompt engineering, and especially people who are deploying more productivity related tools, which I know you are anyway, sort of Copilot type tools, those sorts of things. But you do need to know something to use them. You do need to prompt.
Yes.
And if you get it wrong, you get annoyed about the result you get and that sort of stuff. So taking that away, we're seeing a bit of a trend towards wrapping generative AI solutions up in some other UI. So it's not a chat or a language-based interface. It's a much more honed interface. These are still using the same technology, but as you say, taking away the complexity from people. They don't need to do the prompts. They don't need to think about the UI. They don't need to think about how to attach files and do all those sorts of things. They're just interacting with an application that's very specific to them. You've seen a bit of a trend towards that recently, rather than just generic, here's the prompt, work it out for yourself.
Yeah, and what we've done, we're quite lucky. We've got a really strong cadre of knowledge lawyers across our business. So those are qualified lawyers, generally fairly experienced, who have chosen to focus more on the knowledge side of law than the fee-earning, client-facing work. They do quite a lot of client-facing kind of training and writing. But we've used them as kind of our super users or our champions for this rollout, to really kind of bridge that gap between the technology and the lawyers, and think about, right, well, in this legal practice group, here are the kind of tasks we're having to do, and how do I help shape those prompts and test those prompts to then have those, either the prompt library or the workflow or whatever it is, so that then the associates or the partners who are doing the work day to day have that, some of that work done for them. It doesn't mean that it completely removes the need for them to understand the structure of a prompt, but at least there's a starting point for them. The other part of that is that it gives us an opportunity to kind of break down the tasks a little bit more. Because I think a lot of the early days of this, people would just throw, here's a contract, here's two example contracts, and here's an output format, please review. And then wonder why they didn't get great results out of it. And so if you have the opportunity to step back and to have people who are embedded in the practice of law, but are less on that sort of cycle of fee earning and trying to build time, they can think about, how do we decompose this into a series of tasks, and maybe have, here's a standard playbook, and I run that standard playbook against this contract, and then I take that output and then I run another prompt that does the formatting, and you chain the prompts and get much better results from that. And it's that sort of quite practical, a little bit boring in some ways, sort of logical step through the task you're trying to do that's required to really get the best value out of these tools. And I think that's often missed, and that's where we've been trying to spend our time to make sure we're getting value and getting consistency in the way that people use the tools as well.
And do you think people are starting to that point about breaking tasks down into smaller chunks is obviously been a learned behavior probably since the beginning of GPT-2. People have slowly learned almost like a microservices type approach to making the request very distinct. Are your users learning those skills as well as technology services, and are they picking up on that, or are they still need a lot of guidance in that space?
I think we're still trying to give that guidance.
Yeah.
Some are, some aren't. I think we have a really good high usage of the tools. I think we haven't necessarily fully embedded that across the entire firm. There's some real bright spots. There's some areas where it's proving a bit more tricky. I think what we're also finding is there are some activities where you can point the tool at it and it will give you really great value. The ability to validate the output is very straightforward, and therefore you're really making a time saving.
Yeah.
Well, there's other ones where actually, even if it's giving you a good output, the amount of validation you have to do to reassure yourself you're getting the right output has used up all the time you might have saved. So it's a bit of a false economy there, and so some of the legal research tasks is a really good example of that. If you're asking it to read through a judgment, summarize the judgment, pull out the key facts, actually that's quite a complex technical task. It seems like it should be quite easy for a large language model to do, but it often misses some subtleties or misses some points, and then you've had to read the whole judgment anyway. You've had to validate it across, so why did you bother? Whereas some of the other tasks, extracting chronologies or extracting key information from contracts, the ability to cross-check that is quite quick, and therefore it's really leading to big savings in time and can be embedded in a set of tasks quite easily.
So part of the adoption then for Lewis Silkin is kind of starting to understand some of those subtleties that exist, so you get better value out of it, basically.
Yeah, and it's not just here's a tool, off you go.
Yeah.
It's much more specific to this user or this group of users. How do they use it in these tasks? Which leads to quite a different approach in terms of technology rollout and how you help users understand that. It's also, the pace of change is just phenomenal, both in terms of the capability of the models, but also the way that those commercial tools have then started building new functionality in, whether it's new sources, whether it's kind of the prompt improvement. You can prompt an AI to improve your prompt for the AI, which is brilliant. It's a little bit meta, but it's brilliant. And that again helps the user, but it's kind of having to explain to people, this week here's 3 new features, and next week here's another 3 features, and that's quite different to the usual way we roll out enterprise tools in the legal industry, where things are much slower changing.
It's interesting. I guess that leads us on into, where do you see the challenges of being both in your organisation and perhaps what your view would be on a wider adoption across legal? Because I think Lewis Silkin have an advantage. They have a CTO with a doctorate in ML, which probably helps a bit, right? So to drive that agenda forward. So, what challenges have you seen inside the organisation, and what do you think the broader sector might be experiencing at the moment?
So I think for us, it's about how do you embed that in the workflows, in the way we do business. How do you account for some of that? The legal industry has been moving towards fixed fee work for a long old time. Well predates any of the large language models. So that's not so tricky, but I think there is a bit of an understanding gap, with clients expecting it to deliver much quicker benefits than it maybe really is. So there's a little bit of, how do we charge for this? We are still investing in these tools, even if it takes less time, and we haven't necessarily worked out how to fully account for that. I don't think anyone in the industry has. I think different types of practice will be affected to a greater or lesser degree. We don't do a huge amount of big transactional deal work, whereas some of our bigger competitors do, and they may be much more affected by that, by those effects of the changing nature of the work. The other thing that I think is really interesting is the effect this will have on in-house teams. I think they are also rapidly adopting the commercial tools, and a number of our clients have also bought these tools in-house as well. One of the difficulties I see with our clients adopting these tools is they often don't have the knowledge banks and the precedents that
you would have,
that we have, or that other law firms have, and so how they structure those prompts, how they have how they build out the prompt libraries, how they build out the workflows, is probably trickier for an in-house team, and that's something that we're exploring with some of our clients. Is how do we help them? How do we train them? Give them some of that access to our know-how, because that is fundamentally a gap. I was on a kind of a client roundtable a few months ago, and one of the clients was like, "So how do you get good answers out of this?" And I said, "Well, you just upload your precedent, build that into a playbook, and then run it." And they were like, "Yeah, but we don't have one of those." I was like, "Okay, well, that's that's something we can help you with, and we can start thinking about." But that gap, if you're a small in-house team, that is a different set of challenges to if you're a law firm. But it is being widely adopted across the piece. And I think there's an interesting question about, if our clients have AI, we have AI, how do we make best use of that between the two of us? How do we work more collaboratively together, including the AI tools we both have?
Does that introduce new business opportunities? So, for example, I am an in-house team, and I don't have that precedent, but I want to look at some of the cases myself because I think they're relatively transactional. I guess that's how it normally works. In-house team thinks this is simple enough for me to look at. If it gets too complicated, I'm going to ring up Lewis Silkin, right? So, but I don't have that precedent. Do you see a future where law firms will offer their knowledge base out as a kind of almost like a fine-tuned model that people can consume and they pay for that? Or is that going to be a value-add service? Or is it just something you think law firms are never going to do because it's their sort of crown jewels?
I think we definitely will do it. It's maybe not as radical as you might think. So if I think about our Rockhopper subscription employment law service, that has always offered kind of handbooks and example contracts and those sorts of things. They've been Word documents that you download and you fill in the square brackets. But they've always been available. They're based on our best practice. We keep them up to date for our clients so that they're constantly aware of the evolving nature of the law. We've similarly done that with our Ouroboros Global Alliance for a long time with our global HR law guide, where you can go on that website and you can see an overview of the law in 57 jurisdictions around the world, and you can say, what are the parental leave rights in Sweden, the UK, and Ireland, and so you can make sure your policies, if you've got global policies, are compliant with the jurisdictions you operate in. So really what we're thinking about is, well, how do you AIify that? And we are just in the process of launching a new AI product called Delphius, which will serve those needs of in-house employment lawyers to be able to get answers to global employment law questions using AI, but using our knowledge base as well, and our global partners' knowledge base. So it's very much grounded in the data and the knowledge we have and we have built up, but we're serving that to clients in a different way. So rather than getting a table of answers that they need to pull together for their board, the AI provides that context for them and a place to get started with, and then they can come back to us with okay, I've got an overview, now I need to dig a little bit further into this detail, can you help me with that? So it's just changing the nature of the way we engage with clients, I think.
Okay. And then flipping it around a little bit, so in terms of the longer or the opportunities in the midterm, you discuss some of them, like I've not used that term before, AIifying. Feels quite difficult to say for me, but anyway, but quite a good term. But you got Delphius coming out. That's what I said. There's definitely some commercial stuff. But what are the other opportunities you see within the organisation to apply AI?
So on the legal side, there's a lot we can do just improving our processes, in making things more efficient, but also being able to do stuff that just wouldn't have been commercially viable in the past. So maybe with a music rights deal, we might have reviewed the 10% of the most valuable contracts that the client was buying, because for the client, that's what made commercial sense for them to do. We do a really deep review on those. What we can do now is offer, yes, we'll do that, but we'll also use AI to do a deeper look at the rest of the contracts and really pull out the key terms and conditions and provide a bit more of a rounded view of the bundle of rights they're buying. So that is more added value to the client than necessarily just driving efficiency for the work that we would have done traditionally. So I think there's a definite difference in how we can serve clients. We're looking at, well, actually, how can you serve clients who maybe wouldn't have been served in the past? There's lots of contracts that just never get reviewed because if it's going to be £1,000 to review a contract and it's only worth £10,000, you're probably not going to spend that money. If you can use AI to make that much, much more efficient, you may well start using that, and you might want to do that transact on that in a different way. So there's definitely just new business models, new ways that we can serve clients. There's also a lot of work that we do in law firms that is behind the scenes. So preparing pitch documents, preparing submissions to the directories, those sorts of things, where actually what we're trying to do is bring together, case studies, references, those sorts of things. There's a huge time saving and efficiency gain there. And then the last bit, and I think this is still a little way off, is how do we better interrogate the data we have using generative AI? So there's a lot of tacit knowledge built up in law firms of, has anyone done, a licensing agreement for a rugby club involving this? And someone will be like, I definitely did one of those. I can't remember when. Let me have a think about it. And that's something that's quite hard to do using Boolean search across a database, but it's something that AI can more likely pick up using kind of semantic search. It can build summaries of, okay, here's what we did in this, in this particular matter or whatever. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to really get more value from the data that we have and the tacit knowledge we have, and make that easier to find for our people, and particularly for our junior associates. I mean, a lot of our junior staff will be trying to learn how to phrase documents, how to communicate more effectively with clients, or put a client's position forward. And often at the moment, what they'll do is they'll turn to other documents that partners have written, other documents that have been reviewed and gone out in the past. I think there's a way of AI sort of enhancing that and speeding up that learning journey, maybe providing a sparring partner to people in a way that they can have stuff reviewed by an AI before they take it to a partner. And so that the quality of the content that's going to a partner is that little bit higher. It means that the partner can probably provide better coaching to those associates in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been able to if they're having to sort of start from a less complete document. And so there's some definite things that will, I think, help with learning and development. I often, when you read the press, it's all doom and gloom for the juniors. Well, we're just going to automate them and it will only be the partners who still remain. I don't think that's the case. I tend to be fairly glass half full about this. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can help people be more effective earlier in their careers by learning by learning from AI and learning from the data that AI can surface.
Yeah.
My boss often talks about, his aim is for our first years to be able to advise like they're a partner, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but there is definitely an opportunity for us to strengthen the initial drafts of any document or any output that our lawyers are giving. I think that's also one of those areas where, rather than thinking about AI as starts from a raw product and it gives you the final version and you don't have to do anything other than some really creative prompts.
Yeah.
It's about how do you get to a good first draft much more quickly? How do you avoid the blank page problem? Or once you've got a good first draft, how do you refine that more effectively? So it's thinking again, as we were talking about earlier, about breaking down the steps and thinking about where is AI going to give me the most value in this overall journey for a task.
Yeah. I might mischaracterize this a little bit, but I'll say it and then you can shoot me down. I think where LLMs have taken off most is in sort of content generation. I mean, obviously, pretty much everything you see around the marketing space now is getting heavily impacted by generative AI. And pretty much every YouTube video you watch about how you use AI is always around content marketing and that sort of stuff, because it's text heavy, content heavy, and I think probably to a certain degree, so are legal firms, right? So I'm wondering, as you get beyond that point of reviewing documents, consuming information, analysing large piece of information, you start to look more towards the agentic side of things, where you've now got agents going away and doing things for you on your behalf without you getting involved. How has that manifested itself inside? Is it that early days in Lewis Silkin? Is that sort of an area that is a bit more difficult to get into because you're starting to get into the process of the organisation and people are like, let's not go that far? How's it been in Lewis Silkin?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting points is what do we really mean by agentic?
Yes.
And there's a lot of agentic washing at the moment, and any chain of thought model that does more than two steps seems to now be an agent. And you're like, well, I'm not really sure that's the case. So I think there's definitely having having an AI large language model going away and doing a series of tasks to get to a final work product, and using multiple content sources for that.
Yes,
definitely we're seeing that already. That's kind of when I was talking earlier about workflows. That's a lot of what I mean. Is that genuinely agentic? Well, to an extent, it's going out to the internet or going out to trusted knowledge sources and searching stuff, building up some content, going away, reviewing that. Maybe you've got multiple models in the mix. So there is definitely on the legal work side some of that already happening. I think we could argue a little bit about how truly agentic it is. On the other side of kind of that agents going into other systems and doing stuff for you, I think we'll start to see that our provider of time recording software will now has an agent that will help you with that. It will check that the time you're recording is compliant with your outside counsel guidelines and help you with that and say, actually, no, that's not permitted before you go through it. And so there is some definite AI agent work in some of those core systems. But I don't think we've got a complete picture of where that is. And I think for some of the higher risk legal work, I don't think we'd be ready for agents yet. We're not going to let an agent prepare an immigration case and then submit it to the Home Office. It's, while you could theoretically see how that could work with agents, I think we're a little way off being happy that will be a sensible or safe approach. So I think what we'll see is probably agents more on the business team and
Yes.
sort of administrative tasks within the legal work for the moment. And then sort of quasi agents, more workflows on the legal side. I think the other piece that's maybe sort of agents is kind of combining plain old automation, traditional automation, whatever you want to call it, with AI. And I think that's been something we've seen from the very beginning is generative AI, large language models are very good at the creative piece. But if you want it to always give the same answer every single time, actually traditional automation is a much better approach. So if you're drafting a cease and desist letter, there's a whole chunk of that never ever changes. How your client wants to be described, what the actions you might want to take are, how long you're giving them to reply, some of the requirements we have in terms of disclosure of who we are, who our client is, what steps we might take next, what advice they should go and get. So you don't really want to mess with that.
No.
So use traditional automation. But the details of the infringement, the details of the evidence we might have gathered or a client might have gathered, that does vary quite a lot. And actually it's quite useful for a generative AI to summarize that in a really good, consistent tone of voice, and drop that into a standard template that we're using normal automation for. So that kind of combination of the more traditional technologies that we've used for a very long time and Gen AI is also, I think, an area where we're starting to see, use. It's not quite agents, but it's not a million miles away from agents either.
Yeah, I think we've seen, not necessarily in the legal sector, but we've seen the emergence of, for example, case management agents where you're collecting a body of information.
Yes.
There is a set of things that need to be done. There isn't an order in the process because maybe they're client dependent and the client doesn't always give it to you in the right order and that sort of stuff. But they're building up a knowledge, and there is an agent that's coordinating that activity, doing all the communications, checking all the tasks are done, dropping out emails to people to say, "Have you done it yet?" That sort of stuff, and then employing agents. Then at that point in time, we've seen some big agent teams. The biggest one we've done so far is a 30 agent team, basically controlling quite a large part of a business process with various points of human in the loop, because no one's going to not do that today. But it's been quite interesting to see the development of that and where some of the challenges arise from that, because again, you and I both know, probabilistic versus deterministic approaches to things. That's the rub of when you use it and when you don't, right? So if you've got to get the same answer every time, you've got to put quite a lot of effort into the large language models to get that exact same answer every time, because they do like to be creative.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also it depends on the nature of the legal work you're doing.
Yeah.
If you're doing a lot of transactional work, then that kind of case management agent approach really adds a lot of value. If you're doing more advisory work, maybe you're not. It's not consistent enough to be able to really build the agents to support that work.
Yeah.
But I this area will develop, and it's part of the excitement of being an AI and trying to be a tech-enabled law firm is thinking about all of these things that we could do, and then helping try and prioritize those to what's the next most valuable thing we can do next.
I'm interested. This is a big question. Do you think this is new technology? So obviously some people will go, this is just more digital transformation. Other people will go, no, this is different, and you have to think about it differently. What's your view?
I think it is different. I think the way that people engage with it is very different to every other digital transformation that I've been involved in.
Yeah.
I've been kicking around the industry for a little while.
Yeah.
So I do think that just the way that people are engaging with large language models is just fundamentally a different approach.
Yep.
I think the speed of evolution is quite different. I also think that nature of deterministic versus probabilistic is a really different way to have to think about things. So it's really challenging both the business side of the users of how they might adopt this technology, but it's also challenging the technologists, the user experience people, the project managers, about how the change managers, about how do we think about helping people adopt this, and how are we even specifying what we want to do. It gives us a lot more flexibility, which is a double-edged sword. So I think it is genuinely different. Does that mean we completely rip up, the rule book and what we've done before? No, but we do need to be alive to the fact that it does require a different mindset going into it, and that's just something we need to kind of skill up, internally and externally to help our users with.
I'm glad we're in strong agreement on that. I'm of the same mind in that actually you can solve problems with these technologies that you can't solve with handwritten, procedural code.
Yeah.
It's just not possible to do some of those things. And that introduces a whole new domain of problems you can solve. And then the probabilistic thing, again, I think it also introduces a whole different way of thinking to how you would develop something, which we see a lot of people struggling with. It's like, obviously in the early days of GPT, why can't it always say that 2 + 2 = 4?
Yeah.
Because every so often it will decide it's 5, right? And so, and that sort of threw people quite a bit.
I think it also changes the scope of problems that are worth trying to solve.
Yes.
With technology.
Yeah.
If you had to have a developer write some code to solve something and then deploy that app to all of your users and communicate that to all of your users and train all of your users to use it, actually there was a certain class of problem that it was worth trying to solve that way. And there were a lot of problems where it was an annoying thing that I'd really rather I'd automate, but it's just too difficult to do. So let's not bother. Whereas I think large language models, and I think particularly as we get into agents and workflows and all of those things, there will just be a class of problem that you wouldn't have done before, or you wouldn't have tried to do before, and you can do now. It just lowers that barrier to entry for solving those problems. It gives us a really interesting conundrum about citizen developers.
Yes,
we've been having that debate for 5 or more years, but it changes the dynamic on that as well from a security, consistency, reliability perspective. That maybe is a continuation of a previous trend, but it really has supercharged it. It's that kind of exponential curve almost of what it's allowing people to do.
Yeah, definitely.